The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Tudors Dynasty Podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson, and today I welcome back friend of the show, Dr. Emma Cahill Marron. Emma, welcome back.
Hi, Rebecca, how are you?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so we have not seen each other, whether in person or on Zoom, for like ever, because I went to England in June and then you
Mhm.
went to Spain. And how have you been?
I was in England too. I've been great. I see that you have gotten a lot of sun. For those who are not watching this, they're just listening. Rebecca has a great tan, so I can't wait to hear all about her summer here in Minnesota after her trip. But yes, it's true. We haven't been on the show together for a long time.
I've missed you, and I really think the viewers and listeners have missed you as well.
Well, and you know me, I've missed talking so much, so I'm back. And well, I did do a little thing for the Tudors Dynasty podcast this summer, right? Thank you so much for letting me host that very special program with someone I admire about the quality in art. That book that came out this year in English. The curator, the head of the Flemish department and the Northern Schools in the Prado Museum came to talk to the Duna's Dynasty podcast, and Rebecca was nice enough to let me host that. Thank you for that. That was a very insightful conversation. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it was really good. And if you want to listen to it or watch it yourself, you can find it. Just scroll down a little bit and you will find it in the list of episodes. Well,
Lots of talking about the Tudors for sure.
yes. Well,
Yeah.
today we're going to talk about I'm going to say one of your favorite topics for sure. At least one of your favorite queens at Tudor court. If you're listening, I feel like I want to give you a second to guess who it is, but I don't think it's going to take much to guess that it's Katherine of Aragon, is it?
Oh, it is indeed. It is indeed. I always come back to her. She's my one true love in Tudor history for sure. And of course, I've had such a long relationship with her that once in a while I have to branch out into other places. I do a lot of work, as you know, also on her daughter Mary, but that's just a natural extension of my study of Catherine of Aragon, really, and her as an agent of change in England for women. And I say this because what she does is she brings women to in the Tudor court to the public sphere. She's the first woman in European history to hold the office of ambassadress, so an official public role where she was representing her father, Ferdinand, shortly after her mother dies. And she realizes that if she's not going to do this for herself, nobody's really helping her that much, especially not the Spanish ambassador in the Tudor court, who's very happy living in London and just letting things kind of linger. So she takes on this role. And this is all because she has been educated. This is what I wanted to talk about, how when we educate people and someone like Isabel of Castile decides to educate her four daughters, they go on to become great representatives of that, but in the case of Catherine of Aragon, very, very successfully. In other cases, like in the case of Juana, the first of Castilla, we did an episode on her and talked about her. It didn't end up very well because the world was not prepared for women that had a voice in many cases. And I say with Catherine of Aragon is a success. It's an ultimate success because her daughter becomes the first, arguably the first queen regnant, definitely the first woman to exercise power in England and rule England, Mary the First. But she has problems with this too because she has a big conflict with Henry VIII, and we all know she doesn't back down. Why? Because she has been empowered by education to have her own voice, and this is something that is new in the Tudor court. And this is something that's very important because it also means that she wants to replicate that sort of atmosphere when Mary is a little girl in England and she has to educate her to possibly succeed her father, but definitely to, in her opinion, become the next queen of Spain too, because she's always thinking of reinforcing this alliance that Spain has with England through her and through her descendants. So it's very interesting to see how Catherine of Aragon just barges in the Tudor court really with this Renaissance education that she's received in the court of her mother, and just really takes the court by storm. I mean, Henry VII really liked negotiating with her, even considered marrying her at some point. So she definitely had savoir-faire, a kind of attitude and wave about herself, that she knew how to talk to people. She knew how to convince people to do what she wanted. She was influential in that sense. So
I know you're going to hate this, but I very recently decided to start watching The Spanish Princess again.
No, it's a great show. I think all fiction that is done to entice people to learn more and to see women in a new light, and this is what the show is doing in The Spanish Princess. Like it, then you could obviously historians or art historians like me, we're just going to pick out all the things that are wrong. But I think the message of that the show has about her being empowered to do this is obvious, and I think it shows that, you know, the tide has turned in historiography, and now we have more books that are talking about. If you read books about Catherine of Aragon about 150 years ago, she's no one. And since 1941 and the big biography of Garrett Mattingly wrote of Catherine of Aragon, she became a different type of figure, and only now we are reaching to understand the extent of her influence in England, which was incredible, amazing.
Let's talk about her influence on England, because that's kind of why you're here today, because we're going to talk about some of the people that she brought to England, and maybe some of the people that she was associated with at English court. So where do you want to start with this?
Well, let's just do some little, maybe we could talk a little bit about her education in Spain to understand that this was just not coming from anywhere. These, her mother, we all know about her. We did an episode on her too, Isabel of Castile, the iconic queen. Isabel I of Castile was, first and foremost, a ruling monarch when Catherine of Aragon was a little girl. So this gave her a new perspective that, you know, her predecessors, the royal children of previous monarchs in Spain did not have, or in Castile, because at this time Spain is still forming. Let's leave it there. Isabel is the Queen of Castile. She marries the King of Aragon, Ferdinand II of Aragon, and they welcome 5 children. And it seems like an ideal situation, but really only one boy. So the boy becomes the center of the hopes of Isabel and Fernando to unite Castile and Aragon under one monarch, because people abroad are already saying, this is Spain, it's Spain. So they are trying to do that, to unify to become more powerful as a new type of monarchy. The monarchies are growing and morphing in this time too. I mean, the Tudors are, we have to think then of Wales and Scotland and all these things that are happening in the early 16th century. In Spain, they're happening at the end of the 15th century with Isabel and Fernando, right? And then what happens is the heir is educated like Arthur Tudor was, really, as a Renaissance prince, because the ideas from the Renaissance are arriving into England, into Castile and Aragon, and Castile and Aragon a bit earlier too, because of that close connection to Italy through the territories that Ferdinand had, for example, in Italy, right? He was the king of Naples. He had territories, king of Sicily too. So really what's happening in the both courts is that these new heirs, Arthur and John, in the case of Isabel and Fernando, are becoming Renaissance princes. But what's innovative and different from the Tudor court and the Spanish court is that the girls are educated by leading humanists. And in the case of Catherine of Aragon, who is the youngest one, by a foreign humanist, an Italian, called Alessandro Geraldini, who is someone very involved in basically the introduction of a revolution in the mindset, really, in the Spanish court, to the reception of ideas like this guy that comes in called Christopher Columbus, saying that he can maybe go and find the Indies. These ideas that the world is round, that the world is bigger, that the individual should be at the center of everything. These new ideas that will evolve more in the 16th century are starting in the court of Isabel and Fernando. And Alessandro Geraldini is one of the people who are in the front of this. He recommends Christopher Columbus to the Queen. He's one of his defendants. And the Queen receives Christopher Columbus for the first time just 2 weeks after Catherine of Aragon is born.
Oh,
So
wow.
she might have been there because she was a baby.
Yeah.
A young baby. So she might have been there the first time he was saying, I'm going to go over there and find that place that later on we'll call America. Let's say that. That was not the conversation that happened, but you get what I mean, right?
Yeah.
Different Italian guy named the continent, not Christopher Columbus for sure. It was Amerigo Vespucci. But rolling that back, that's the kind of court she grew up in. But not only is Isabel doing this, she's bringing foreign artists, mainly from Flanders, because that's the kind of art that she loves. And she loves this art because it has quality, like we talked in that episode with Alejandro Vergara from the Prado Museum, that those ideas of you are seeing something that could be true, the verisimilitude and the idealism, these figures that it look like magical when you look at these pictures that are painted in Flanders, right? So she's bringing artists like Juan de Flandes, John from Flanders, or Michel Zittau, who is from Estonia but trained most probably in the workshop of someone as important as Hans Memling, who is one of the leading Renaissance artists of the time, and possibly even went to Italy as artists would do to train in this new art, the Renaissance art, because they were going to Italy to see what the classics had done, the sculptures, these things that were inspiring them to paint in a way that things were represented looking realistic. Like Alejandro Vergara said in the previous episode, it's very difficult to achieve. So that's why Isabel had to go to Flanders, to a place in Flanders where these artists were doing this, to bring these artists to her court. But she also had humanists, so people that were translating the text back from Greek, from originals in Greek, from originals in Latin. She even brought a woman who knew Latin better than anyone else in Castile, apparently, called Beatriz Galindo, and she became known as the Latinist in the Castilian court. So there's been a lot of debate whether she's not included in Isabel's accounts as the teacher of Catherine of Aragon and her sisters, but she was serving the Queen. So if your mom has someone that speaks perfect Latin in her court serving her, and she has a humanist training you in Latin, don't you think you're going to talk and practice Latin with that woman when you're sewing with her or when you're reading your prayer books? We also have in those accounts that Isabel has lots of things that she gave Catherine. And we also have lots of surviving material associated with Isabel of Castile that proves that she had a preference for only the best art coming from Flanders, especially in things like manuscripts, right? And this is very important for this connection with the Tudor court, because in those manuscripts that Catherine of Aragon and her sisters started receiving, that Isabel was receiving from Flanders, the art was by artists that were working in Flanders, illuminators, painters that were trained in the art of decorating manuscripts with extremely good care and technique to produce these images that we all love in these books of hours and prayer books and missals and other types of manuscripts that we've learned to love. When we see the introduction of the Renaissance style into England with Flemish artists like the Hornboots, or later on a little bit with Hans Holbein in other kinds of designs, these are things that Catherine of Aragon was already seeing in the court of her mother. This is the connection point. The connection point is Catherine's upbringing in the Spanish court, seeing the art of these artists from Flanders, but also interacting with people like the artists that her mother recruited, and living with Margaret of Austria, who came to marry her brother and became Catherine of Aragon's French tutor, because the Queen of England and Margaret Beaufort sent a request telling Isabel of Castile, ladies don't speak Latin in the Tudor court. They don't speak Spanish either. So since Margaret is there now, have her learn some French so she can learn French to speak it when she's with Arthur and when she's with the ladies, basically, because that's where she was going to be too, right? With the ladies of the Tudor court of Elizabeth of York. So this is where Catherine of Aragon acquired this taste for high quality art that when she went to England, she did not have access to until she helped Henry recruit these people to continue doing that. And the best artists arrive in the Tudor court when Catherine of Aragon is influential, starting with people like Pietro Torrigiano, who trained with Michelangelo in Florence.
Oh, yeah. We remember that story about those two.
You remember the story? Can you refresh our memory, please?
Oh,
Rebecca,
gosh, I don't know that I remember it well enough, but I feel like, was it Peter punched Michelangelo?
Yes, Pietro punched Michelangelo. Yeah. See, everybody likes a good story from a bar, right?
Yes.
Saturday night. It was pretty much this, and let's explain it in like artistic terms, right?
Okay, yeah.
In artistic terms, these artists were ruthless against each other, competing to see who was the best. Torrigiano was very good modeling clay, modeling terracotta. That's what he came known for. He has he sculptured the sculpture of Henry VII, mm-hmm. right? So he became known for that. And these terracottas, honestly, when they're good, they are very lifelike.
Yes.
Verisimilitude, right? Again, these terms about quality. Torrigiano is excellent, but Michelangelo is arguably the best artist in Western culture. So it's a bit difficult to compete with the GOAT, right?
Yes.
It's a bit difficult. So what was happening in this story that sounds like it happened outside a bar on a Saturday night, it really is, they were competing to see which of the arts represents better life, the real life, right? Which one? If it was Michelangelo's work, or if it was Torrigiano's work in clay, or if it was Michelangelo painting or sculpting, right? And there's a term for this called paragone, the competition between artists. And we've heard about this in other arts, like Mozart had his famous rival, and every great artist has a great rival, right? Well, in case of Michelangelo, like Vasari tells us, Vasari is the person who records the lives of the Renaissance artists of the 16th century. He's an artist himself, but he records the lives and he writes biographies of these artists, tells us that another leading artist, Cellini, never wanted to go to England when Torrigiano asked him, because he said, not with those barbarian people, and you crazy, that broke Michelangelo's nose, people were scared of this guy, but not Catherine of Aragon, because she knew how amazing his work really was. And she was a little bit trained to deal with difficult people because she had married one to start with, right? She recruited Torrigiano shortly after her marriage with Henry VIII. He was working in the court of Margaret of Austria. He had fixed a bust of Mary Rose Tudor, who was betrothed to future Charles V. This is where all the connection with the leading artists that come into the Tudor court is, from Margaret of Austria and Catherine of Aragon, and the marriages that they are arranging between Charles V and first Mary Rose Tudor, and then future Mary I, who became betrothed to Charles V in 1522. And that's when the Hornboots arrive to England.
I think one of the things that I just want to interject for a minute here, and what I'm kind of taking from this is the Renaissance started on the continent and in Europe well before it reached England. And would you say that when it reached England, it had just started, and then Katherine of Aragon helped to accelerate it a little bit, maybe?
Exactly. We know the Renaissance had started to arrive in the reign of Henry VII. There's many examples of that. For example, one of the most famous artists in the Renaissance is Raphael Urbino, from Urbino. With Michelangelo, he's probably, everybody knows about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So
oh, that's right.
Because that's a good way to remember the names of these four leading artists, right?
Yes.
So we have, right.
I forgot all about that. I'm glad you brought that up.
How can you forget about it? Come on. How could you forget about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
I mean, I'm a few years older than you, so maybe that's why I've already started. I mean, you're still a kid.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca. That's why you're my favorite. But any millennial will remember the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I think other people will remember that. I mean, they're
Yeah.
iconic. Come on. So yes, going back to Raphael, he is the one who painted a painting of St. George killing the dragon that was given to the English ambassador who took it to England in the reign of Henry VII. So there are like Alejandra was talking in the other episode, the snippets of things that are arriving. There's actually Henry the Seventh employs a Flemish artist called Waywick Maynard, who is the only one who is recorded painting pictures of the royal family. But this is as late as 1502. Catherine of Aragon is already in England by that time. So, and this all comes from these portrait painters, these artists doing new things, especially portraiture is something very new. They are involved in these marriage negotiations that Henry started with Isabel and Fernando. So the earliest picture of a Tudor ever to go to the Spanish court is recorded in 1488 when Arthur is only a little boy. So it must have been a picture of him as a baby that the Spanish ambassador receives. And the first time they're really negotiating the marriage between Arthur and Catherine of Aragon. And then just a little bit later, there is an artist that eventually that year paints pictures of the Spanish royal children, that in the Spanish royal accounts he's given the name of Master Antonio, but Master Anthony could be in English, and he's given the name he's English. They do this for John of Flanders from Flanders. Well, this one was English.
Gotcha.
I'm not sure that this painter was English. I think he came from the English court. But all the artists, like, we have to think that the Trastámaras, the house that was ruling in Castile and Aragon, came from Burgundy, and from the origins were there. And Henry VIII had a connection to the Burgundian court. He had lived in the continent, so he also favored Flemish art. It's just with Catherine of Aragon, it gets accelerated and it gets taken to a new level because of the connection she has with the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs, I'm afraid, are everywhere.
Yeah,
especially in Italy and Flanders, where the leading artists can produce these type of arts that wow the English court. Let me just bring up an example. Not about Catherine of Aragon, her daughter Mary I. When Mary I became Queen of England in 1553, we all know that she married Philip of Habsburg, but Philip of Habsburg was not going to marry Mary Tudor. He was going to marry in Portugal, right? But Mary becomes queen, and they're like, oh, no, she needs a Spanish husband because she is a pro-Spaniard, right? Her cousin Mary of Hungary sends Mary I a portrait of Philip painted by Titian, right? Titian, a famous artist from Venice that started a revolution in portraiture and royal portraiture, right? She not only sends this portrait, but she says, well, he painted it some years ago, so he looks a bit more mature now. Because, I mean, Philip was young. He was already a widower, but he was young. He was 27 when he married Mary, who was, older, maybe even younger, maybe 25. And so she says, he's older now. And also she says, and make sure you take some distance to look at this picture like you should always do with this artist's work. She's training Mary to look at very, very innovative Italian art, because Philip is coming with a lot of people, amongst which are artists from Italy. Like Jacopo d'Atrezzo would make portrait medals of Mary and Philip. Antony's Moore was sent to paint Mary. There is, every time there's a connection with the Spanish court, there's a revolution in art because of the artists that are involved in creating these images and these artworks that are connected to political issues with the Spanish monarchy. In a nutshell.
In a nutshell, she says. I have to go back just a little bit when you were talking about Henry VII, because I think sometimes it's easy to forget because we focus so much of our attention on Henry VIII and his 6 wives that we forget about Henry VII.
He
And
had 6 wives? What are you talking about?
I know, surprise.
Oh, my
Spoiler alert.
goodness. I guess I always finish the books in the first chapter.
Oh my goodness. But what I was going to say was, I think we forget about Henry VII and his time before he became king and how he did spend so much time on the continent. And I'm glad that you brought that up because I think that's an important part of the story.
I think a very important part of the story is also his wife. Because this portrait that was given to the Spanish ambassador in 1488 was given to him after he had visited the child, and the women from Elizabeth of York's court had danced for him and showed all their ceremonials. So was the queen who gave the portrait? Because then when it was recorded in the Alcázar in Madrid, it was in Queen Isabel's possession, not in the possession of Fernando.
Oh.
Also, the portrait painter, the artist from England, this Master Anthony, right? If he was English, I'm sure his name wasn't Antonio, okay? I'm sure his name was, and if he was Flemish, he would have been like Anthony Moore, right? That same name. He appears in the Queen's accounts, right? He paints portraits for the Queen. I'm saying this because the women are the ones exchanging the portraits. When Claude of France sent a portrait of the Dauphin to Catherine of Aragon in 1518, it was Claude who sent it. When Francis I's sister sent miniature portraits of Francis and his sons, when he was imprisoned by Charles V after the Battle of Pavia, it was his sister who sent the pictures to Henry VIII, not Francis I. I just read a very interesting biography of Mary of Hungary that claims, from the early 20th century, that claims that it was Mary of Hungary who sent Anthony Moore, not Charles V. So there's a lot of work being done now on this. It was, for example, it was Anna of Denmark who sent portraits of her son and herself to the Queen of Spain, Margaret of Austria, different Margaret of Austria to the one we're talking about today. We're jumped into the 17th century now. But it was her. So it's the women who are exchanging these portraits. It's the women who are sending portraits of their children to advance marriages for their children in foreign courts. And we know Isabel had several portraits of the Tudors when this inventory in the Alcázar was carried out at the beginning of the 16th century. She had that, it says, she had several portraits. She had one of Arthur on its own, and it said, they say it's Arthur. So I think that's the one of him as a little boy, because obviously he would look, it was a child. So this is a guy just recording this, right? He's just recording what he's seeing, and they say it's the Prince of Wales. Well, we know that's Arthur, right? And then she had a box. Isabel also had a box with portraits of Henry VII, Elizabeth of York, another portrait of Arthur, and a portrait of her daughter, not Catherine of Aragon, but Maria, her daughter, her fourth daughter. This makes sense to me because the Tudors, Henry VII was involved in a marriage project that would have ended up with the marriage of Maria to James IV of Scotland.
Oh.
He was a mediator. So the Tudors were mediators between the Stuarts and the Trastámaras in this case, in this negotiation. So it makes sense to me that a portrait of Maria would be in that box with the portraits of the Tudors. That's the reason behind it, I think. They were painted at the same time, because I believe that this box with portraits of the Tudors must have arrived when the marriage agreement between Catherine of Aragon and Henry and Prince Arthur was sealed for the second time in 1496 by the Treaty of London. And then is when we have a very fine portrait of Catherine of Aragon holding the bud of a red rose that is in the Thyssen-Bornemisza Museum in Madrid. And we have portraits of the Tudors holding roses too. The only surviving portrait of Elizabeth of York in the British Royal Collection, painted around this time, she's holding a white rose for the Yorks, right?
Yeah.
So Catherine of Aragon would be holding a red rose for the Lancasters. Who else holds a red rose in a picture painted by a Flemish artist?
I feel like I should
She's
say,
sitting down. She's
I was just
looking
gonna
at
say
you.
Mary the First.
She has a little smile on her face. She's iconic. She's a first ruling queen of England.
Yeah,
Come on, you
yeah.
know this one. She's in the Prado Museum.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Obviously.
these are all connected. This is all connected. And it's connected to the women being the people in charge of certain affairs in marriage negotiations, like the exchange of portraits.
This is so interesting. Like you were talking about all these women and how these women were getting these portraits and sending them all around. And I made a
They're
quick
sending
note.
selfies to each other.
Well, it's funny because I
Not
was
selfies, I guess. Pictures, right?
but
Selfies.
they were really like the marketing queens of their time. They were
Exactly. Look at my son.
Yes. Look at how handsome he is.
I mean, he does have a mole there on his eyelid, but I told the artist to omit that because nobody wants to see the mole that,
Marketing. It was marketing.
Yeah, marketing. Give him a little Instagram filter there, please.
Oh, we're back to the filters from the previous episode.
Yes, right. But that's what I'm saying. Like you could present people in a way. And we see this, we know some portraits, the models are repeated in different ways. And from those, we see sometimes how things are confused because of the portraits follow the same model. Is it the same person? Is it the same person presented more maturely? In the case of Arthur Tudor, the only surviving portrait in Hever Castle, he's also holding a little flower. So years ago, I proposed that these flowers start with that portrait that Juan de Flandes painted of Katherine of Aragon for Isabel of Castile, holding that little bud of a red rose. By the way, there's another version of that portrait in California that we should go and take a look at sometime. Santa Barbara.
All right. Deal.
Have you ever been there?
No.
It's like heaven on earth. Come on.
I think everybody's beginning to realize what a sheltered life I lived after my trip to England.
Well, not anymore, Rebecca, because we're going to California.
That's right. Where else are we going? We're going
Just
to
to
Spain.
see Flemish art. We're not there for the fun that California has to offer otherwise.
Oh, I'm going
for the research.
Is it near the beach? I don't remember where.
It's on the beach. This place is crazy because this is at the University of California.
Okay.
In the campus they have in Santa Barbara. It's in Art and Architecture Museum there. And you can see the sand around the museum because it's on the beach. It's the campus enters into the beach. Yes.
Wow. There, I got to work.
We're just there for the portrait because this portrait is very, very interesting. You know why?
Why?
Because the top there's a layer of paint that's been put on the top of this painting. I already proposed that this could be covering something like a name, because sometimes these portraits had inscriptions, like the pair portraits of Isabella and Fernando in the British Royal Collection. They have inscriptions with their names. So why is there a splash of paint at the top covering something?
Ooh.
Because I mean, this is the identification of Catherine of Aragon. It could be someone else until you find solid evidence. I did find that shortly after Catherine's 12th birthday, when she was old enough to marry Arthur and she was able to consent, and she actually did just some days after, that artist received a payment from Isabel of Castile from the Queen's extraordinary payments. So I think he must have been paid for paintings that were sent to England that started this trend of people being depicted with flowers in England.
Interesting.
That's what I proposed years ago.
Nice. That's really interesting. Well, when we talk about artists, we have to talk about the one that everybody knows, when it comes to the Tudor court, right? Hans Holbein, the younger.
Right. Well, yes, because he's just marvelous. Who doesn't like Holbein? I
Well,
mean,
I do have to say something real quick because you were talking about how these portraits are portraying like this perfect image of somebody.
mm,
And I immediately thought of Holbein's sketch of, I think it was Richard Rich's wife with the mole and all the hair coming out of it.
well, I think that wasn't a marriage picture, though, was it? To
No.
marry someone. It was just he was probably like, just, it's endearing sometimes to see people how they really, truly, oh, you think they were, because like we were saying in that episode, we don't really know if these people look like this. It's because Holbein achieves this verisimilitude to such extent that we have decided in our brain these are the faces of Henry VIII,
Yeah.
of all of his courtiers, really. And I think this is the success of the Tudors, really. The fact that we can see these people's faces in our brains when we talk about them. And nobody will convince me otherwise. You'll have to be very compelling to convince me otherwise, because we don't have that emotional connection with Henry VII.
No.
No, and it's through paintings, really, because we do have that marvelous sculpture by Torrigiano of Henry VII, doesn't have the same impact as the image of Henry VII. Also, the image that Holbein created of Henry VII was reproduced in many. I mean, there was a mural in Whitehall that everybody could see. It was disseminated. The amount of dissemination that royal images get in the 16th century is also helping, because it's not only Henry VII that seems to us like a very, very like a person we can see in our brain, Francis I too, because Jean Clouet was doing that in the French court. And we have it in Spain with Antonis More, because he's painting pictures of the Habsburgs. Then when we go to the Prado and when we go into that room where Mary is, she's not the only one that seems to be wanting to talk to us, even though she, honestly, Rebecca, you have to see this in person. And we have to take Peter Stoffel. Dr. Peter Stoffel has to come and see Mary, because it's truly impactful. You're never the same after you see that picture. I'll assure you. It's just, and then the fact that she's next to her grandmother now, But also when you see all of those, you do think of Holbein, because Antonis More has that same power of really showing people in a way that you think you can, not only you see them in your brain, you think you know them. You think you can tell things about their personality just from looking at those pictures, right?
Yeah.
That's what Holbein really achieves, I think, in the portrait of Henry VII, that tension of his eyes trying to tell you his story, right? And how he's a very great, powerful king, right? And Mary also is trying to say that in her portrait of Antonis More, too. So Holbein comes to England, and for many years it was said, because of the agency that Erasmus of Rotterdam, the agency that he has in England, and it's always been said that he lived in the house of Sir Thomas More, and these are the first people he painted in England, the family of Thomas More and this and that. That's all very relevant to the fact that in 1526, Erasmus of Rotterdam wrote a book upon Katherine of Aragon's request on no other subject than marriage. And I don't know why I have to keep saying, why is this not like in the forefront of every Tudor article? I don't know why, because Erasmus of Rotterdam is the most influential humanist in 16th century Europe. And Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon are the most famous royal couple in English history, arguably, with Anne Boleyn's permission. But the reality, no, because it's true. I mean, it's just their divorce, and Anne Boleyn's fame is because of the divorce from Catherine of Aragon, right? They're very famous. In this book that Erasmus writes for Catherine of Aragon, we have the presentation copy that he dedicates to the Queen of England. He says, Serenissima Regina Anglae Erasmus Rotterdami, so to the Queen of England, Erasmus of Rotterdam, don't omiss it. I give this to you. The book has a frontispiece by no other artist than Holbein. And in the introduction to that book, the dedication that Erasmus of Rotterdam does to the Queen of England, he talks about Isabel of Castile, he talks about Mary, but he also talks about art and about a painter. Something that Juan Luis Vives, another humanist that Catherine of Aragon brought to England, a humanist from Spain, had mentioned 3 years prior in his Education of a Christian Woman, where he mentions in the dedication to Catherine of Aragon, he says, this book is in words what an artist would represent in your portrait, is a portrait of your soul. I mean, you have men that are the most the highest intellects in Europe writing things like this for you. And how are you not the most famous woman in the 16th century? I don't really know. It's because of that conflict that she has with Henry and all of the things that are lost to us from her time being a queen and how great she was, and the narrative that was constructed later on, because let's face it, honestly, she embodies the Catholic faith and many other things, right? But in that time, she is the most famous queen in the whole world because she is the heiress to Isabel of Castile, and because she's educating Mary Tudor to become the first English princess that is also a humanist. She trained Mary herself until the age of 7. She was her main teacher. In the library of the palace where Mary grew up, there are grammar books, Spanish grammar books that there are at least 2. So I think one belonged to Catherine and one to Mary. And this grammar book, the first Spanish grammar book ever to be written in 1492, was dedicated to Isabel of Castile. So Mary was learning Spanish with a book that was, the first words are dedicated to the most glorious and brilliant Diana, our queen, Isabel I of Castile. I mean, imagine that. How can you not change your perception of your role in life as a royal woman when your grandmother is the most famous monarch in the 16th century, really, right?
Yeah.
So this is really what is happening. It's a necessity for Catherine of Aragon to recruit humanists and artists to educate Mary to fill in very, very difficult shoes, become the first queen regnant, but also the next queen of Spain and empress of the Holy Roman Empire when she's betrothed to Charles V in 1522, because he's the king of Spain, is also Holy Roman Emperor at this time.
Yeah.
So no pressure, Mary. And then what happens? In the spring of 1526, Charles marries another cousin. Tan, tan, tan. Isabel of Portugal. We also did an episode on, right? Yeah. Remember?
Yeah.
And what happens? The Anglo-Spanish alliance is broken off by Charles V, and Henry VIII has the biggest meltdown in English history.
He had a tantrum.
The biggest one.
Yeah.
It can only be probably compared to tantrums in current politics, maybe.
Yeah, yes, yes.
But that's about it. I don't think there's ever been a biggest tantrum in the history of England as Henry VIII's tantrum after Charles breaks off his engagement with. I mean, he had sent her to Ludlow with a household where Susanna Horenboot and the other Horenboots were, and Juan Luis Vives and Gilles Douve, her French tutor, and all these people that were teaching her to become the leading monarch in Europe in her generation. And Henry's like, no, I need a son. No. That's what happens, really. My argument is that it's not his love for Anne Boleyn that draws him away from Catherine, is Charles marrying Elizabeth of Portugal and breaking off an alliance that, I mean, this was hard. This was hard for Catherine too, to know that her nephew, who she had protected, fought for, represented in the Tudor court for many, many years under very, very harsh circumstances. Let's think she goes to the field of Cloth of Gold in 1520, right?
Yeah.
So she's done everything for him, and he's like, well, sorry. So but on the other hand, Charles is pressured because he's 26 and he doesn't have an heir. So everybody has their own battle to fight, right? With these having heirs. And it's not only Henry. Charles V is also, people are like, come on, you're 26. You're not even a popular king, because really your mother is imprisoned in Tordesillas still. Juana lives until 1555. So he's a foreign Spanish king. He has an uprising in 1520 even. So he needs to get on with his own things too. So he can't wait for Mary. Mary's only a child. With Isabella, he can marry and have children right away.
Yeah, that was your bomb drop for this episode. I just want you to know.
Was it?
Yeah, I think so.
I mentioned this before, didn't I?
Maybe. We've talked so much. I think sometimes I forget what we do on podcasts and what we talk about privately. But the fact that you said that when the marriage negotiations between Mary and Charles fell through and he married Isabella was really when Henry began to want a son, not because Anne Boleyn was the one saying, I'll give you that son that she's not giving you.
Yeah. I think you saw a little.
I saw.
Yeah. That was my husband. Now you know him. We have some work going on in the house, guys. Sorry. So it wasn't a vision or anything. Nobody's seeing, things that are not there. Yes, there was a person there. For people who are not, there was a person that showed up in the image. It was my husband. So, yes, with let's circle back that. The bomb. I think we've talked about it before, and it's very important because it's not that Henry started to want a son. He always wanted a son. And Catherine wanted a son too. She went to beg for a son to Walsingham at least 3 or 4 times. All she did day in and day out was pray to have a son. And she did have a son, and they did have a son, and he died, and they did have other children, and they died. But she knew that wasn't going to happen for her in 1522 when she was betrothing her daughter to her nephew.
Yeah.
So she wanted to secure a marriage for Mary that would protect her rights, because it's not the same to be married to some English lord than to be married to the most powerful monarch in Christendom, who happens to be your cousin, We also have to understand, and here comes my defense of Henry VIII, is that would have meant the end of the Tudor dynasty in England, because if Charles and Mary would have married and had a child, that child was a Habsburg, was not a Tudor, right?
Right.
But the reality is that what Catherine believed is that Providence had decided that. God had decided that. It wasn't them. The same way that her parents, her mother was succeeded by her sister, who wasn't not in the best conditions, probably, despite all the, harassment that she suffered and all that. This was an ongoing problem for a lot of monarchs, not just Henry VIII. It's Henry VIII's incapacity to embrace that and to see what's happening around him in the 16th century. Women are going to take power, as Mary finally did, or then Elizabeth I did after Mary. Why was Elizabeth I accepted so quickly after Mary's death? Because Mary had set that precedent for her, and everybody had accepted it. And one way or another, good or bad, had ruled England, right?
Yeah.
And had kept power, and was respected by her council, and was accepted by her subjects. That's why when she died and she left her sister as her heir, not like Edward did. Edward did differently, right? Yeah. And how did that go, Edward? When Mary did the right thing to do, everything went so smoothly. And even these artists like Lavina Turnlick, who were associated with these networks that Katherine of Aragon had brought to England, continued to have a very successful life in the Tudor court, because she had changed this, and because she had created a necessity for women to have their own self-image in these portraits that she had commissioned of her little girl when she was growing up and she was betrothed to Charles V, but of herself, portraits that she had seen in the episode about the quality in art. We talked about a comment that Catherine makes when she's only 20 years old, saying that this portrait of Margaret of Austria, that's not very good. You know who's a very good painter? It's Mitchell Sittow, because I was with him in the court, in my mother's court, and I can tell you he draws far better pictures than this.
Yeah.
More accurately, more perfectly. What she's saying is that if you want to be a Renaissance prince, if you want to have a court of magnificence, you have to recruit these people. That's why she brings Torrigiano to her orbit. He does, actually, it's very cute what he does for her. He does some pomegranates made of terracotta. This is how we know it's him, because it's the first time there's a mention to terracotta for the celebrations of the Epiphany when her baby son was born, when little baby Henry was born in 1511, for the celebration of the Epiphany. The Epiphany was a very important feast for the Spanish court. So she brought someone who was trained in an art that was similar to the one that in Spain, they also favored Italian sculptures. See how the connection is there? Italian sculpture and Flemish painters. It's the same as her mother was doing. It's just these people are from another generation. In the case, what is innovative about Catherine of Aragon's case is she empowers women artists like Susanna Horenboot, who is the most underrated Renaissance artist there is out there. Let me say that. This was going to be my bomb, but you said this is in the European arena. This is the biggest bomb.
Okay.
She's so underrated, but she was the best. She was the best.
Emma, I love when you come on the show. I feel like I always learn so much about Katherine of Aragon and about art during the time. And I think many of the listeners and viewers of this podcast learn so much when you come on this show. I feel like you're a bottomless pit of information.
That's a good way to put it.
It's very enlightening. Like I honestly never know what you're going to say. When we do this, we don't prep beforehand and go, we're going to talk about this and we're going to talk about this.
I mean, you don't prep?
I mean, a little bit, but honestly, when it comes to you, I know I can trust you to come to the show with all this amazing knowledge that you have on this time period. Not only the time period, you on art, you are so knowledgeable and you know so much about the Spanish monarchy and you know a lot about the English monarchy that you find a way to bring all of these things together. And that's my favorite part of having you on the show, is that you just bring together everything that we've been learning over the years. So thank you.
Well, I was prepping for this episode the whole summer, guys. So, I mean, when I say prepping, it's obvious that I have, when I come in here, I don't have a sketch of what I'm going to talk about, but this is what I usually talk about is always connected to what I'm doing, what I'm researching about, what I'm writing about. So this is why it comes so natural to me to talk about these things. It's not that, prep in the sense this is my work. This is what I do. So it's not difficult to prep, but all I do in my life is prep for talking in the Tudor's Dynasty podcast with you, Rebecca.
Oh, aren't you the sweetest?
It's all been leading to this moment.
All leading to this, all just for me. Gosh, you're the greatest.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I know. I'm a good friend.
You are a great friend. Well, Emma, as always, we could talk about this all day, but I think I'm going to thank you for coming on now. And I'm sure we'll have you back on again in the near future to talk about all your wonderful knowledge that you have.
Well, maybe we could talk about a bit more about Susanna and her role. Because if you want me to give a little snippet.
Yes, please.
She was probably the woman. She was actually, first let's start by saying she was praised by Dürer, who is, I know I keep saying that these people are the leading Renaissance artists of the time, but Dürer is also a leading Renaissance artist of his time from Germany. We all know Dürer, right?
Yeah.
We all can see. Go on Google Dürer portrait, and he looks like a rock star. So Yes, it's in the Prado Museum. Oh,
Okay.
surprise, surprise. And he looks like he's from the 70s rock band. He's amazing. Dürer is amazing. He bought a picture. He met Susanna when she was 18 in 1521. And he said in Antwerp, and he said that the picture that he bought from her, he was like, it's amazing that a woman can paint like this. So Susanna is a very underrated Renaissance artist because of all this destruction of evidence linking her to Catherine of Aragon.
Oh.
But don't despair, because I have been working on it for 10 years and now I'm ready to talk about it. So next time we can talk about
Yes.
all that, because Susanna Horenboot and Levina Turnlik, the two first women artists in the Tudor court. Actually, Levina is the first woman to be appointed court painter in Europe in the last year of the reign of Henry VIII, most probably because of the influence of his daughter, Mary Tudor. These women are related to Flemish artists that were producing art that Catherine already saw in the court of her mother, her parents, the Gerard Horenboot in the case of Susanna Horenboot, and Simone Benning in the case of Levina Turnlik. So this is all connected to Catherine's upbringing in the Spanish court, Isabel's role and her preference for Flemish art. But in the case of, like she done with Beatriz Galindo in the Latin, Catherine of Aragon did with the women artists for Mary. She brought Susanna Horenboot to serve Mary in Ludlow, probably to train her to paint herself. Because in that episode we do about Susanna Horenboot, I will talk about how Catherine of Aragon also painted. So stay tuned.
Oh, Dr. Emma, thank you so much for coming on the show with me again today.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Tudors Dynasty podcast. If you love the show and would like to show your support, please head on over to my Patreon page. That's Patreon, patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty for more information. Over there, you're going to find commercial-free episodes. You'll get early access, and there's some exclusive content as well, with more stuff to come as I'm rebuilding it. Also, recently I returned from England and cannot wait to go back. But this time I would love to bring you with me. So if you're interested to go on a tour of England with me, why don't you send me an email, Rebecca@tudorsdynasty.com, for more information. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.